After 4 long years, Black Myth Wukong is finally here. 陛下，您让臣妾等得好苦。Anyways, there is a lot to discuss about the story of the game, and if you're a little confused by it all, don't worry, I got you. As promised, welcome to my new story breakdown series for Black Myth Wukong, where I'll be covering backstory, references, things you may not have noticed, answering questions including, who is the Destined one really? What is the Black Myth? What is even the point of the game? Fair warning, these videos are going to be long and there will be spoilers. I was the girl who spent her free time at bookstores growing up, so I do have a flair for the dramatics and a tendency to read too much into things. So feel free to skip ahead using the timestamps. Since the game doesn't explicitly explain everything, there are naturally going to be some things that are my personal interpretation, especially given that Chinese is such a poetic and complex language. Additionally, there are religious and philosophical themes at play in the game, so I don't want to speak out of turn, and I will do my best to cover those aspects with respect and to the best of my knowledge. Now, before I get into the actual breakdown, we need to understand the rules of this fantasy universe, how it operates, and what the overall structure is. Journey to the West depicts Chinese folk religion, which is essentially an amalgamation of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. But the latter two are presented as the most prominent because the highest ranking figures from both of these religions make up the overall celestial pantheon. Buddha, the highest being from Buddhism, resides in the West on Erlang Shen, or Spirit Mountain, and they exist alongside the deities of Taoism, which includes the Jade Emperor, as well as Taishang Laojun, the supreme exalted Lord Lao, who is Lao Zi, and a court of immortals who live in heaven in the sky. Lord Lao is specifically said to live in the highest of the 33 heavens in Tushita Palace. These locations become relevant in later chapters, which is why I'm mentioning them now. In this collective celestial pantheon, there is very much a hierarchy and an order to things. Anyone who doesn't obediently fit into that order, like Sun Wukong, will be dealt with accordingly. Next, while these deities coexist in this world, they are still different philosophies with different belief systems and end goals. Within the realm of how they operate in Journey to the West and Black Myth, and in overly simplistic terms, in Confucianism, the primary concept is having a good moral character and pursuing social harmony. It developed based on the teachings of Confucius, who is a Chinese philosopher, so it's more like a code of ethics. It presents the idea that people are innately good and can improve themselves through self-cultivation. In Buddhism, the end goal is to achieve enlightenment or nirvana. Buddha taught that suffering is a part of human existence and that it's caused by negative actions and emotions. So to achieve nirvana, one has to eliminate things like greed, hatred, ignorance, attachments, and obsessions in order to escape the cycle of rebirth that's caused by karma. In Taoism, the main focus is balance with yin-yang and with nature, and the end goal is immortality. Immortality doesn't mean you can't ever die, but you stop aging and can live for many years. The term for this in Chinese is 长生不老, and we'll see later on that Wukong says this exact phrase in the prologue.
你可知这长生不老的佛位，有多少人求而不得？
长生不老？三界六道不就毁在这4个字上？
So again, the deities in this celestial pantheon can all work together against a specific target that threatens them all, like Sun Wukong, but at the end of the day, they are still separate factions and they are competitors because their worldviews are fundamentally different. This is important to remember when playing Black Myth because there are characters manipulating events like pieces on a chessboard for the benefit of their respective religion. And the characters they are manipulating are primarily Yao Guai, which is a very general, overall blanket term for creatures with some level of cultivation or powers. In a lot of Chinese fantasies, anyone and anything can become an immortal through enough spiritual cultivation and eventually attain human or humanoid form, whether it's a rock, a plant, or a goldfish. And you can increase your cultivation level and powers through different ways.
Some choose to meditate for 50 years.
Another way that we see featured prominently in the game is to consume jingdan, which are special pills created through Chinese alchemy that are essentially concentrated elixirs that boost our cultivation. Yao Guai are in a separate category from Shen Xian, which is a very general term for the immortals in heaven. The thing is, 妖怪 are not necessarily evil, but those of higher rank in the celestial pantheon can be prejudiced against them. They're often seen as bad by nature, whereas Shenxian are seen as good. Doesn't seem fair because the Shenxian are the ones in power. Lastly, a lot of scholars more qualified than I have investigated what the point of Journey to the West is and interpret it in different ways. First, in broad strokes, Journey to the West can be seen as an allegory for human life, a journey where we all either strive to improve ourselves or squander it away through obsessions we can't let go. It also presents themes about religious and human morality and can be seen as a satire on the powers that be, balancing between individuality and following the prescribed order of the authority. Could be helpful to keep these themes in mind as we explore the story of Black Myth. And for those unfamiliar, let me give a quick summary of Journey to the West. A monkey is born from a magical stone. He learns that he is destined to die, so he seeks to become immortal and wipe his name from the register of life and death. He learns a lot of overpowered abilities and succeeds in this goal and becomes so strong that the immortals in heaven become concerned. Despite their best efforts, they can't subdue him nor force him to adhere to their order. This is when Sun Wukong titles himself the Great Sage Equal to Heaven, and his arrogance leads him to rebel and wreak havoc in heaven. So the Jade Emperor implores Buddha for his help. Buddha imprisons Wukong under a mountain for 500 years until he is released by the monk Tang Sanzang, who becomes his master. For his redemption, Wukong is tasked with serving as the monk's protector on his journey to the west to retrieve sacred scriptures. The traveling band also includes Zhu Bajie, a pig who loves food and women, Sha Wu Jing, a sand yao, as well as Bai Long Ma, a white horse who is really the son of the Dragon King of the West Sea. After facing 81 tribulations on this journey and successfully retrieving the scriptures, Wukong achieves enlightenment and becomes titled as 斗战胜佛, the victorious fighting Buddha. But what happens after? This is where the story of Black Myth Wukong begins. We open on a shot of Sun Wukong in his full battle regalia, and he's not just wearing any old gear. No. These pieces have names and will become relevant in chapter 6. Atop his head, he has the Feng Chi Zi Jing Guan, the phoenix tail cap made of red gold. Adorned on his body is the Suo Zi Huang Jing Jia, which is chainmail that's made out of gold. And on his feet is the Wo Si Wu Yun Lü, a pair of cloud treading shoes, the color of lotus root. And of course, he's got his Ruyi Jinggu Bang, which is the iron cudgel that can change size and attack opponents according to its owner's wishes. One thing to note here for Chinese fantasies, strong artifacts like a weapon or relics tend to only recognize one master. It's not that they're sentient per se, but they do have a kind of innate will where they will only answer to one, and it's usually someone who is also of immense power. If you are not strong enough to wield the item, it will either not listen to you, or it can even corrupt you and bend you to its will. In the case of the Ruyi Jinggu Bang, in Journey to the West, Wukong went to Aoguang, the Dragon King of the East Sea, to look for a suitable weapon that he could use to protect his home. Wukong didn't like any of the weapons the Dragon King presented because they were either too light or didn't fit his hand well. Finally, the Dragon King shows him a giant iron pillar which suddenly gleamed with golden light. The pillar was 20 feet long and as thick as a barrel, and Wukong was like, this would be better if it was shorter and thinner. And the pillar listened. It became shorter and thinner until it was the size of a sewing needle that Wukong could store in his ear. And it only ever listened to Wukong, which means there is only one being who can wield it. This also becomes relevant towards the end of the game. As for the armor, he also obtained these from the other Dragon Kings of the Seas. And one thing I want to point out here is this is the ensemble he wore when he called himself the Great Sage Equal to Heaven, when he was directly rebelling against heaven. However, after he met the Tang monk who became his master, his attire changed and it became more demure, more mindful, like a monk's. So yes, if you're going into battle, you'd obviously wear your best armor, but I also take this to be another symbolic representation that Wukong wants to return to who he was before he embarked on the journey to the West. His true self, not someone he was essentially forced to be in order to be redeemed. Now, off in the distance, we see some large looming figures. Sun Wukong fearlessly flips off the edge of the cliff towards them before rising on a cloud, racing towards these figures. This is called Yun, his somersault cloud skill, which enables him to travel 108,000 li in a single jump. Now we can get a closer look and see that there are 5 figures here. And let me just say, they're the perfect example of size isn't everything, because in the novel, Sun Wukong made short work of all of them. The 4 smaller ones are the 4 heavenly kings, who are the protectors of Dharma, which are cosmic laws that govern the universe. In Buddhism, Dharma refers to the teachings of Buddha, so I take their appearance here to be symbolic of Wukong challenging the order once again. The biggest figure with the blue skin is Erlang Shen, the mighty spirit god. He was one of the generals of heaven and also one of the first to be dispatched to deal with Wukong during the original Havoc in Heaven. He also got his butt whooped in the novel. Even though they're not actually a threat to Wukong, I still got chills watching this scene for the first time because this welcome wagon, they're the same characters who try to defeat Wukong at the beginning of the original novel, including the 100,000 soldiers we see here. But what's also interesting to me is, heaven knows Wukong could beat them all. Easy. So why send them out again? Unless they have an ace up their sleeve. More on this later. And now we hear Sun Wukong speak.
人，我保住了；金，我取到了。
Whoever did the Chinese dubbing did a great job because while it's not 100% alike obviously, his inflections and tone is very similar to the actor who plays Sun Wukong in the 1986 TV adaptation of Journey to the West, which is absolutely famous and beloved in China. Wukong muses that he's fulfilled the tasks heaven required of him. He protected his master and he retrieved the scriptures. That is aligned with the novel. But Black Myth takes place after, and in the game storyline, we learn that Wukong didn't want to be a Buddha or take his position in the celestial order after Journey to the West. All he wanted to do was go home to Huaguoshan, Flower Fruit Mountain, to live his life happy and free. Heaven apparently couldn't have that, and in retribution, they killed his kin, his fellow monkeys. Wukong was always very protective of his monkeys in the novel, and you'd think heaven would be against killing innocents, but remember how I mentioned that they see themselves as superior to Yao Guai, very classist. This dog is Xiao Tianquan, or the Howling Celestial Dog, and he is the loyal companion of this character, Erlang Shen, who is another deity that is very popular among Chinese people. I'm not sure if I find him attractive, but I guess he's kind of cute. Also known as Yang Jian, which is his personal name, Erlang Shen is a powerful warrior and one of the only characters in Journey to the West who could go toe-to-toe with Wukong in battle. A bit of backstory, Erlang Shen is actually the Jade Emperor's nephew. His mother, the Jade Emperor's sister, fell in love with a mortal, which was forbidden. Love is just overall not allowed in heaven. And this also becomes relevant in chapter 4 of the game later. As punishment, the Jade Emperor imprisoned his sister, Erlang Shen's mother, underneath a mountain. To free his mother, he used his axe to cleave the mountain in two, and that is the same move we see here in the prologue. He and Wukong also have history, and his appearance here is significant because 1, he is a foil to Wukong, and 2, there's a secret plot afoot, which we'll get into more in later chapters. So he and Wukong are very similar in terms of their strength. They both violated the heavenly order in some way, Erlang being born the son of a mortal and wanting to free his mother, and Wukong for being uncontrollable and wreaking havoc. But the difference is, Erlang does kind of take his place in the celestial order by serving as a general of this celestial army. Wukong eventually submitted to this order in Journey to the West, but in Black Myth, he's refusing to do so any longer. While this prologue does seem to present them as enemies, it's more prudent to think of their relationship like rivals, where there is some of that mutual respect. For more backstory, the first time they fought, their duel consisted of 300 rounds involving combat and transformations, and Erlang Shen was actually prevailing, and a big reason is because of his iconic third eye in the middle of his forehead. This eye allows him to see through deceptions and transformations. One of Sun Wukong's abilities is 72 transformations, which basically means he can turn into anything. Erlang Shen also has this ability, but because of his third eye, he could see through Wukong's guises. Despite this, Heaven cheated a little during their battle. The supreme exalted Lord Lao threw down a metal hoop, which knocked Sun Wukong down. Erlang's dog then bit him to prevent him from running away, and then they were finally able to capture the monkey. So technically, even though Erlang Shen seemed to have the upper hand, Wukong lost because someone else intervened. But even he admits in later chapters that he was bested. Back to the prologue scene. After trading blows with Erlang Shen, Wukong decides it's time to fight elsewhere and transforms into a bird. When I first saw this scene, I thought, oh, he turned into a sparrow, because Erlang, who is also capable of the transformations as mentioned, turned into what I assumed to be a sparrowhawk here. These are the birds they changed into when they fought in the novel. A sparrowhawk is a predator for sparrows. But after getting a better look, this bird is actually a sacred creature called 众鸣鸟, which is known to have the body of a chicken, but sounds like a phoenix, and is iconic for having 2 pupils in each eye. This becomes more relevant in chapter 1, so I'll get into this more in my next video. This following part, though, broke my heart. The Jinggu, the tightening hoop, which was said to have vanished after Wukong achieved enlightenment in the novel, reappears on his head. If you watched my last video about the headband, you'll know that Guan Yin, frequently known as the Bodhisattva of Mercy and Compassion, is the one who originally gave Tang Sanzang the Tightening Circlet as a way to control Wukong. Every time he would misbehave, the monk only had to chant a specific mantra called the Jinggu Zhou to activate the circlet, and it would constrict around Wukong's head, causing him immense pain and forcing him to stop whatever he was doing. The metaphor in the novel is Sun Wukong represents the Buddhist concept of Xingyuan, or the monkey of the mind, which basically refers to how the human mind lacks control. So functionally, the circlet reins all of that in so that Wukong can overcome all of his vices. But it's really a metaphor for using discipline to control our unruly minds. When Wukong achieved enlightenment at the end of Journey to the West, the circlet vanished because it was no longer needed. Once you achieve nirvana, your mind is supposed to be peaceful and calm, so the tightening circlet was never supposed to be a torture device to subjugate someone. But in Black Myth, we have a darker angle to the story where going on the journey to retrieve scriptures was essentially a plea deal Sun Wukong took as part of his punishment and restitution for wreaking havoc in heaven. And in this game, the tightening circlet is very much intended to be a collar. Also, in the novel, Guan Yin and Tang Sanzang were the only 2 who knew what the mantra was to activate the circlet. It's not explicitly shown who activates it in the prologue, but I would venture a guess that Guan Yin is the more likely option of the 2 because we find out in a later chapter that the monk had gone into hiding. He wouldn't need to be a fugitive if he was against Sun Wukong. That's why I think Guan Yin is the much more likely culprit here, especially since Wukong didn't want the Buddhahood anymore, and she is a Buddhist deity. As Wukong writhes in pain, this gives Erlang Shen the opening he needs to land the finishing blow with his spear. He thrusts his weapon into Wukong's chest, seemingly killing him? Yes and no. And I know, I also hate it when answers are non-committal like this, but let me explain. Wukong can't actually die in the mortal sense of the word. In Journey to the West, there are many ways to achieve immortality, and Wukong achieved immortality multiple times. First, he was taught the secrets of immortality by his first master, Xu Puti Zu Shi. Next, he scribbled out his name from the register of births and deaths. He ate a ton of peaches of immortality in heaven. He drank jade wine of immortality. He drank some immortal elixir belonging to Lord Lao. He also ate fruit from a ginseng tree called Ren Shen Guo, which takes 9,000 years to ripen, but also grants immortality. I may be forgetting some, but point is, you can think of these like layers on top of each other that make him way harder to kill. In the novel, the most anyone could do was trap him. So for him to go out like this, no, something is afoot here. Like I said, he can't perish in the mortal sense of the word, but he can voluntarily re-enter the cycle of reincarnation. This is another popular trope in Chinese fantasies where immortals would often choose to enter the human realms again and reincarnate as a means to further cultivate themselves, or in other cases, they were forced to do so as a form of punishment. We now have a bit of a time skip, and an older monkey on Shan, Wukong's birthplace, tells us that while the great sage's body was broken, his spirit endures. In other words, his physical body may be gone, but Wukong is not. You can think about it this way. In Chinese fantasies, when you reincarnate, you are technically a different person each lifetime, but your soul, your essence, remains the singular. Next, we also learn from this older monkey that Wukong split himself into 6 relics representing his 6 senses: the eyes, ears, nose, mouth, body, and mind. I first talked about the 6 senses in my theory video about Black Myth from over a year and a half ago. I theorized back then that some elements or characters may have something to do with the concepts of the 6 desires and 7 emotions in Buddhism. I heard recently that Game Science originally planned for the game to have 13 chapters instead of the 6 we got, so that means 7 chapters were cut, or perhaps combined. I'm looking at you, Chapter 3, you were long as... Pure speculation on my part, but it would make sense numerically. But back to the 6 senses. As I understand it, Buddha believed that suffering arises from sensory contact because we become attached to things through our senses. And these senses were also included in the Journey to the West novel, represented by 6 robbers who tried to attack Wukong and the Tang monk early on in their pilgrimage. They introduce themselves as eyes that sees and delights, ears that hears and rages, nose that smells and loves, tongue that tastes and desires, body that bears and suffers, and mind that perceives and covets. The robbers demanded that the 2 leave their horse and valuables, but Wukong refused and beat them all to death. Quite severe, yes, but this is basically indicating that to escape the cycle of rebirth, we have to get rid of these attachments that are formed through our senses. And isn't that interesting? Because Sun Wukong's name is often translated to monkey awakened to emptiness. More specifically, Wu means to comprehend or to be enlightened about. In Taoism, Kong represents seeing through the illusion of a separate self-nature. Kong in Buddhism refers to the concept that everything is impermanent. This honestly can be very confusing, but one way to think about it is to use yourself as an example. What do you consider as the self? Is it your physical body? If so, how much of it can you remove before you are no longer you? Alternatively, is it your mind? What happens if you lose all of your senses and memories? At what point are you no longer you? The way I personally see it is, our senses also serve to make up our sense of self. Through our senses, we're able to perceive the world, perceive ourselves, think on those perceptions, and then act accordingly. The implication from the prologue is Wukong's physical body was chained to the tightening band, and that there's no way to truly remove it. So in order to be free from it, to be free from the shackles of heaven, he had to separate from his physical body by breaking himself apart into these relics that contain who he truly is. The old monkey confirms the great sage has died, but it's not a spiritual death, because if the 6 senses make up who Wukong is, and they still endure somewhere in the world, then so too does he. For now, we are told that Wukong has returned to the stone from which he came. This stone was said to have been nourished by heaven and earth since the creation of the world, and then one day split open to reveal a stone egg from which Wukong was born. Him returning to stone is symbolic of a new cycle, his rebirth, because he is once again entering the cycle of reincarnation. And now we get the first appearance of the player character, the Destined one. And notice how he's wearing a tiger pelt around his waist? This is significant as well. In Journey to the West, shortly after the Tang monk freed Wukong from the mountain he was trapped under, they came across a fierce tiger. Wukong killed the tiger, skinned it, and wrapped its pelt around his waist. He was completely naked before this, by the way. And given that this is the Destined one's very first outfit that we see, it's a clue into who he really is. And so begins the journey of Black Myth. Not to retrieve Buddhist scriptures like in the original novel, but to retrieve Sun Wukong's 6 senses which had been taken by Yao Guai kings and bring him back to life. Overall, I thought this prologue was an incredible way to start off the game. I literally had goosebumps all over my body the first time I went through it. It was a lot of fan service for people who are familiar with Journey to the West, but also establishes early on that the game is going down its own darker path. In my next video, I'll be covering the story of Chapter 1, where the real fun begins. There's so much to uncover, so subscribe.